There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a woman after she leaves a narcissist. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of relief, but the silence of someone standing in the wreckage of a house she built with her own hands, wondering how every wall she raised became a prison. She does not understand, not yet, that the architect was never the man she loved. The architect was something older, something buried so deep inside her own psyche that she mistook it for fate, for destiny, for the magnetic pull of a love she believed was written in the stars. Carl Jung had a name for this phenomenon, and it was not romance. He called it projection, the unconscious transfer of one's own inner contents onto another person, so seamlessly, so completely, that the boundary between self and other dissolves like salt in warm water. And here is the truth that will sting before it heals. The empath does not fall in love with the narcissist. She falls in love with her own unlived self, reflected back to her in his mirror. Stay with this thought. Do not rush past it. Because what follows will dismantle a story you may have told yourself for years. The story that you were simply too kind, too open, too trusting, and that a predator found you in the wild and consumed your goodness. That narrative has its uses. It protects, it soothes, but it does not liberate. And liberation, not comfort, is the only worthy destination when you have walked through the kind of fire that leaves your fingerprints on someone else's cruelty. Today, I am going to show you the mechanism behind the most misunderstood dynamic in modern relationships. Not through blame, not through self-pity, but through the unflinching lens of depth psychology, where Carl Gustav Jung mapped the hidden architecture of the human soul and revealed that the people who wound us most are often the ones we unconsciously summoned to complete ourselves. Let us begin where Jung himself would begin, with the shadow. Not the shadow as pop psychology has reduced it, not the trendy concept of shadow work you find on social media between ads for crystal bracelets and morning affirmation journals. The shadow, in its original Jungian formulation, is the totality of everything you have refused to be. It is the drawer in which you have placed every trait, every impulse, every desire that your family, your culture, your religion, and your wounded childhood told you was unacceptable. The shadow is not merely your darkness. It contains your unlived light as well. The ambition you suppressed because your mother called it selfish. The anger you swallowed because your father punished you for having a voice. The sexuality you buried because the world told you that good women are not hungry. The power you denied because somewhere, in the architecture of your early years, you learned that being visible was dangerous and being small was the price of being loved. Jung wrote, with the precision of a man who had descended into his own underworld and returned with maps, that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. This is not poetry. This is mechanics. The less you know your own shadow, the more power it has to operate beneath the surface of your awareness, choosing your partners, directing your desires, orchestrating the very circumstances you will later call accidents, coincidences, or bad luck. The empath who finds herself magnetized to the narcissist is not experiencing bad luck. She is experiencing the gravitational pull of her own unintegrated shadow, projected outward onto the one person in the room who wears confidence like armor and takes up space without apology. The very things she has forbidden herself to do. Consider the typical architecture of the empath's early life, and you will see the blueprint for everything that follows. She grew up in an environment where emotional labor was her currency, where she learned, before she had language for the lesson, that her worth was measured by her ability to feel what others felt, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to regulate the emotional temperature of rooms she entered. Perhaps there was an alcoholic parent whose moods she learned to read like weather patterns. Perhaps there was a depressed mother whose sadness became her responsibility. Perhaps there was simply an absence, a void where unconditional love should have been. And she filled that void by becoming indispensable, by becoming the one who holds everything together, by becoming so attuned to the pain of others that she lost the ability to locate her own. In Jungian terms, she developed a persona, a mask, a social presentation of self that was entirely organized around empathy, caretaking, and emotional availability. And everything that contradicted this persona, her rage, her selfishness, her desire to be served rather than to serve, her hunger for power and recognition and adoration, all of it was exiled to the shadow. Now here is where Jung's insight becomes surgical. He observed that what we repress does not disappear. It seeks expression through projection. The qualities we have disowned in ourselves, we will encounter in others, and we will feel an almost hypnotic fascination with those others, a pull that we will mistake for chemistry, for attraction, for the hand of fate. The meeting of two personalities, Jung wrote, is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the reaction he describes is not always the reaction of love. Often, it is the reaction of the unconscious recognizing itself in another body, another voice, another set of behaviors that embody precisely what we have refused to embody in ourselves. The empath looks at the narcissist and sees someone who takes without guilt, who commands attention without shame, who occupies the center of every room without the crippling fear that being seen means being punished. And something deep inside her, something older than her conscious mind, something rooted in the shadow, whispers, "That is what I need. That is what I have been missing. That is the part of me that was stolen." She does not hear this whisper consciously. What she hears instead is the narrative of romance. She tells herself that she has found someone extraordinary, someone whose charisma and intensity make the world feel electric, someone who finally makes her feel alive. And she is not wrong about feeling alive. She is simply wrong about the source. The aliveness she feels is not generated by the narcissist. It is generated by her own shadow, activated by proximity to someone who embodies it. She is not falling in love with him. She is falling in love with the parts of herself she has never been allowed to express, the parts that he carries on his surface like a flag, while she keeps hers locked in a cellar beneath layers of niceness, accommodation, and the exhausting performance of perpetual warmth. This is the cruelty of projection. It feels indistinguishable from connection. When the empath looks into the narcissist's eyes, she does not see a man with a personality disorder. She sees a mirror reflecting a version of herself she has always wanted to be, but never dared to become. She sees freedom from the tyranny of always putting others first. She sees permission to want, to take, to be the protagonist of her own story. And the narcissist, who possesses an almost preternatural ability to detect what someone needs to see in order to be captured, plays this role flawlessly. Not because he is consciously strategic in the beginning, but because he too is driven by unconscious forces. His own projection falls upon the empath with equal precision. In her endless capacity for empathy, he sees the unconditional acceptance his fractured ego demands, the mirror that will reflect only his magnificence, the emotional supply that will keep the machinery of his false self running. They are not two people falling in love. They are two shadows finding each other in the dark. Jung called this process of mutual projection the constellation of the animus and anima, the inner masculine within the woman and the inner feminine within the man, archetypes that carry the entirety of what each person has not yet developed in themselves. When these archetypes are projected onto a real person, that person becomes something they can never actually be, the carrier of your wholeness. The empath projects her undeveloped power, assertiveness, and self-priority onto the narcissist. The narcissist projects his undeveloped vulnerability, empathy, and capacity for genuine connection onto the empath. Each person becomes, for the other, not a human being but a symbol, an archetypal figure charged with the psychic energy of everything unlived. And because the projection is unconscious, neither person sees what is actually happening. The empath believes she has found love. The narcissist believes he has found supply. Both are operating from the same fundamental error, the belief that what they need is outside themselves. The tragedy, and it is a tragedy in the ancient Greek sense of the word, where the hero's flaw is inseparable from the hero's greatness, is that the very quality that makes the empath extraordinary is the same quality that makes her vulnerable to this dynamic. Her capacity for deep feeling, for attunement, for reading the unspoken currents beneath the surface of human interaction is not a weakness. It is a genuine gift. But a gift that is unaccompanied by self-awareness becomes a liability. An empath who has not done the work of integrating her shadow, who has not acknowledged her own capacity for selfishness, her own hunger for recognition, her own need to receive as well as give, will inevitably project those qualities onto someone else. And the narcissist, with his almost supernatural ability to perform confidence and self-assurance, becomes the perfect screen for that projection. There is a moment in every relationship between an empath and a narcissist when the projection begins to crack. It happens gradually, like water finding fissures in stone, but there is always a moment, a conversation that felt wrong, a cruelty that was too precise to be accidental, a silence that lasted too long and carried too much weight, when the empath's conscious mind begins to register what her unconscious has been orchestrating all along. The narcissist is not who she thought he was, but more importantly, and this is where the real confrontation begins, she is not who she thought she was either. The woman who believed she was pure empathy, pure kindness, pure light, must now face the possibility that she was also need, also hunger, also the architect of her own entrapment. And this confrontation with the shadow is, paradoxically, the very crisis that can set her free. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong movement towards psychological wholeness, the integration of the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self into a unified, authentic personality. Individuation is not a gentle process. It does not happen through positive affirmations or gratitude journals. It happens through suffering, through the dismantling of illusions, through the terrifying encounter with the parts of yourself you have spent a lifetime avoiding. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung wrote, and he meant it literally. The expansion of consciousness requires the destruction of the container that previously held it. The empath's relationship with the narcissist, for all its devastation, can become the crucible in which this expansion occurs, but only if she is willing to turn the lens inward, to stop asking, "Why did he do this to me?" and begin asking, "What in me chose this? What in me needed this? What in me is still unconscious?" This is not a question of blame. Let that be absolutely clear. The narcissist's behavior is his own responsibility. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the erosion of boundaries, the systematic dismantling of the empath's reality. These are real, they are damaging, and they deserve to be named. But naming the narcissist's pathology, while necessary, is not sufficient for liberation. Liberation requires that the empath name her own unconscious participation in the dynamic, not because she caused the abuse, but because understanding the mechanics of her own psyche is the only thing that will prevent the pattern from repeating. She did not cause the narcissist's cruelty, but she did provide the stage on which it was performed, and the reason she provided that stage lies in the unexamined territory of her own shadow. Think of it this way. The narcissist is not a random event in the empath's life, the way a car accident or a natural disaster is random. The narcissist occupies a specific psychological niche. He fills a function in the empath's inner world that no amount of therapy focused solely on his behavior can address. That function is the function of the shadow carrier. He carries, on his surface, everything the empath has refused to carry in herself. And as long as she needs someone else to carry those qualities, as long as she has not reclaimed her own capacity for assertiveness, for boundary setting, for healthy narcissism, for the ability to say, "I matter, my needs matter, and I will not apologize for taking up space," she will find another carrier. The face will change, the name will change, the specific tactics will vary, but the underlying dynamic will remain identical, because the dynamic is not about the narcissist. The dynamic is about the empath's relationship with her own shadow. Jung understood this with a clarity that still unsettles people nearly a century after he articulated it. He wrote that, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This single sentence contains the entire architecture of the empath-narcissist bond. The empath who has not made her shadow conscious will experience its manifestations as fate, as the mysterious and apparently inescapable pattern of falling for the wrong men, of being drawn to people who take more than they give, of finding herself, again and again, in relationships where her kindness is weaponized against her. She will tell herself that she is unlucky in love. She will tell herself that all the good ones are taken. She will tell herself that there is something fundamentally wrong with the world that makes genuine love impossible for someone like her. And none of these stories will be true. The only truth is that her unconscious is choosing for her. and it will continue to choose until she takes the reins back from it. Not through willpower, not through vigilance, but through the slow, painstaking, sometimes agonizing work of shadow integration. What does shadow integration look like in practice? It begins with the willingness to be uncomfortable. It begins with the empath sitting in the quiet of her own solitude and asking herself the questions she has always avoided. Where in my life do I use empathy as a shield against my own needs? Where do I perform kindness in order to maintain control? Where do I give not from abundance, but from the terror of being abandoned if I stop? Where is my anger? The anger I have been told is ugly, is unfeminine, is unspiritual. And what would happen if I let it speak? Where is my selfishness, my ambition, my desire to be admired not for my sacrifice, but for my power? These are shadow questions. They do not have comfortable answers, but the answers, when they come, carry the weight of liberation. Because each answer reclaims a piece of the self that was previously projected onto someone else. Jung spoke of the gold in the shadow, the idea that the shadow contains not only the qualities we consider negative, but also the qualities we consider too good, too powerful, too bright for us to claim. The empath's shadow often contains enormous reserves of personal power, creative force, and authentic confidence that were suppressed early in life because the family system or the cultural environment could not tolerate them. When these qualities are reclaimed, when the empath learns to be assertive without guilt, to set boundaries without apology, to occupy space without the need for permission, the narcissist loses his function. He is no longer needed as a shadow carrier because the empath has taken her shadow back. And without the projection to sustain it, the magnetic pull dissolves. What once felt like irresistible chemistry now reveals itself for what it always was, the unconscious seeking its own reflection. There is another layer to this dynamic that deserves attention, and it involves what Jung called the participation mystique, a term he borrowed from anthropologist Lucien Levy-Bruhl to describe the unconscious identification between two people, where the boundaries of the self become so diffuse that one person literally cannot distinguish their own emotions from those of the other. This is the state the empath enters in the narcissistic relationship, a state of merger, of emotional fusion, where she loses the ability to locate where she ends and where he begins. She feels his pain as if it were her own. She absorbs his anger, his contempt, his emptiness, and processes it through her own nervous system as though it originated inside her. And the narcissist, consciously or unconsciously, exploits this fusion because it provides him with something his psyche desperately requires, an external processor for the emotions he cannot tolerate in himself. This participation mystique is not love, though it masquerades as love with devastating effectiveness. It is a regression to an earlier developmental stage, a return to the undifferentiated state of the infant who does not yet know where mother ends and self begins. The empath re-enters this state because it is familiar. It replicates the relational pattern she learned in childhood, where her survival depended on her ability to merge with the emotional state of an unpredictable caregiver. And the narcissist re-enters this state because it is the only form of intimacy his fragmented psyche can tolerate, an intimacy that requires no vulnerability on his part, because the empath does the emotional labor for both of them. In this sense, the empath-narcissist bond is not a relationship between two adults. It is a reenactment of a childhood wound, played out on the stage of adult romance, with both partners unconsciously cast in roles that were assigned to them long before they ever met. Breaking free from this dynamic requires more than leaving the relationship. It requires leaving the psychological structure that made the relationship possible in the first place. It requires the empath to dismantle the persona of the all-giving, all-feeling, all-absorbing woman, and to build in its place something more complete. A self that includes empathy, but is not defined by it. A self that can feel deeply without losing its boundaries. A self that loves with open hands, rather than with the desperate grip of someone who believes that letting go means being abandoned. This is the work of individuation. It is not quick. It is not painless, but it is the only path that leads beyond the repetition of patterns and into the territory of genuine freedom. Jung observed, late in his life, that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This sentence is often quoted on inspirational posters and Instagram pages, stripped of its weight, reduced to a pleasant idea about self-discovery. But in its original context, this statement carries the force of a reckoning. To become who you truly are means to confront who you have been pretending to be. For the empath, it means confronting the reality that her empathy, in its unexamined form, was not always a gift freely given. It was sometimes a survival strategy, a mechanism for controlling unpredictable environments, a way of purchasing safety through the currency of emotional labor. It means accepting that beneath the surface of the woman who loves too much lies another woman, a woman who is angry, who is hungry, who is tired of carrying everyone else's pain, who wants something for herself and has been too afraid to say so. And it means welcoming that woman home, not with shame, but with the recognition that she was always there, always speaking, always trying to be heard through the noise of the persona. When the empath completes this circuit, when she integrates the shadow, withdraws the projection, and stands in the fullness of her own complexity, something extraordinary happens. She no longer attracts narcissists, not because she has learned a set of red flags to watch for, not because she has armored herself against manipulation, but because the psychological mechanism that drew her to them no longer operates. The projection has been dissolved, the shadow has been reclaimed. And in the space where the narcissist once stood, reflecting back her own unlived power, there is now nothing but clarity. The clarity of a woman who no longer needs another person to complete her, because she has completed herself. This does not mean she will never love again. It means she will love differently. She will love from wholeness rather than from lack. She will choose partners not because they carry her shadow, but because they complement her conscious self. She will recognize the difference between chemistry, which is so often the unconscious recognizing its missing piece in another, and genuine compatibility, which requires two whole people, not two half people desperately clinging to each other in the hope that their combined fragments will add up to something complete. Jung called this mature form of relationship the conjunctio, the alchemical marriage of opposites, which can only occur when both partners have done the inner work of integrating their own polarities. It is a love that does not consume, it illuminates. So if you are sitting with the aftermath of a narcissistic relationship, if you are still carrying the confusion and the grief and the bewildering question of how someone who seemed to see you so completely could treat you so cruelly, hear this. The person who saw you so completely was not him. It was you. You projected onto him the vision of wholeness that already existed inside you, and he merely reflected it back, distorted by his own pathology, but originating in your own psyche. The love you felt was real. It was simply misaddressed. It was meant for you. It was meant for the parts of yourself you had never been permitted to love. And the task now? The task that is not punishment, but privilege, is to redirect that love inward, to the shadow, to the unlived self, to the woman beneath the woman you were trained to be. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." The narcissistic relationship is the dream, vivid, consuming, utterly convincing while it lasts. The awakening comes after, in the silence, in the solitude, in the willingness to look inward and discover that everything you sought in another person was waiting inside you all along, patient and enduring, like a seed buried beneath stone, needing only the weight of that stone to be removed in order to finally, irreversibly, grow. Remove the stone. Do not wait for permission. Do not wait for the right time, the right therapist, the right book, the right sign from the universe. The right time is the moment you realize that you have been living inside someone else's story, and you have a story of your own that has been waiting, in the shadow, for the courage of your attention. Begin there. Begin now. And know that the woman who emerges from the other side of this work will not be softer or harder, more guarded or more open. She will simply be whole. And wholeness, not love, is the foundation upon which everything real is built.